It was a warm September evening in 1974, and the Las Vegas Hilton showroom pulsed with excitement. Neon lights from the Strip danced off the mirrored walls, casting shimmering reflections across a sea of finely dressed fans. It wasn't just any night in Vegas. It was an Elvis night. And when Elvis Presley was in town, the city didn't just sparkle, it came alive. Inside the showroom, every seat was filled. Some fans clutched souvenir scarves, others held hands to their hearts. The soft murmur of conversation mingled with the sound of clinking glasses as people took their final sips of champagne before the lights dimmed. The orchestra tuned quietly in the pit, the stage curtains trembling slightly as the final preparations were made behind the scenes. Backstage, Elvis stood alone for a moment, his white jumpsuit shimmering under the dressing room lights, decorated with rhinestones and the weight of expectation. He looked in the mirror, brushing a loose strand of hair back into place. At 39, he was still the king, still beloved, still magnetic, but behind those piercing blue eyes was a man carrying the invisible burdens of a complicated life. Fame had been generous, but it had also been cruel. The pressure to be perfect, to please everyone, to live up to his legend. It never left him, not even for a breath. Tonight, though, he planned to give the crowd everything. Every note, every sway of the hips, every grin. He knew what they came for, and he knew how to give it. Just off stage, the backup singers gathered in a semicircle, warming up their voices. Among them was a new face, Janet, fresh to the Vegas scene. She had only recently joined the group. She was in her early 30s, with a smooth contralto voice and eyes that carried a quiet storm. Elvis had insisted on giving her a shot after hearing her sing in a small Memphis gospel choir. She was good, very good, but this was a different stage, a different beast altogether. Janet adjusted her mic pack with slightly trembling fingers. She tried to breathe deep, but the walls seemed to close in. This wasn't a church basement. This was Elvis, Vegas, the big time. And while the others hummed scales and joked about set lists, Janet stayed quiet, her gaze fixed on the curtain that separated her from the roar of the crowd. Hands rushed by with clipboards and cables. The band's drummer gave a thumbs up to the conductor, and then, like clockwork, the house lights dimmed. A voice over the PAAs and gentlemen. The Hilton is proud to welcome the one, the only, Elvis Presley. The curtain flew open. The stage exploded with light, and the crowd, they erupted. Elvis strutted out, all charm and swagger, as if born under those spotlights. The horns blared the opening notes of a CC rider, and the band followed like thunder. His voice filled the room, rich and soulful, with a smoothness that made time stand still. But behind him, as the music soared and the show roared to life, there was a flicker of something else, a heartbeat off, a tension that hadn't been there before. Janet, now in her spotlight for the first time, stood stiff, her eyes scanning the crowd, her jaw tight. No one in the audience noticed. Not yet, but not everyone on that stage was ready for what would come. The first few songs rolled out like clockwork. CC Rider led into I Got a Woman, and then a softer rendition of A Love Me. The audience swayed, clapped, some even wept. Elvis was, as always, magnetic, a master of energy, timing, and grace. But just behind the veil of that charm, something was off. It started small, a missed harmony, a late breath, a glance that lingered too long. During a Help Me Make It Through the Night, a soft ballad that leaned heavily on background harmonies, Janet's voice wavered. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't right. Her pitch was just a touch flat. Not enough to send alarms through the crowd, but enough to raise eyebrows in the band. Elvis, always attentive, noticed. His eyes flicked over his shoulder mid-song, catching Janet's face. Her lips tight, her brows knit together, her jaw clenched like she was holding something back. Or maybe holding something in. From his side of the stage, Charlie Hodge, Elvis's close friend and rhythm guitarist, gave a subtle shake of his head, his expression curious. What's going on? During a short instrumental break, Elvis stepped aside for a sip of water and whispered to Joe Esposito, his road manager. Is she okay? Joe shrugged. She's been quiet all day. That wasn't good. Quiet could mean nerves, or it could mean something was brewing. Earlier that afternoon, Janet had kept mostly to herself in the dressing room, earbuds in, scribbling in a worn leather notebook. She hadn't laughed with the others. She hadn't joined the usual pre-show rituals, and when someone offered her a chance to rehearse a solo bit, she waved it off. I'm good, she had said softly. I just need to be alone. Alone, it seemed, was where her mind still was. Back on stage, the band moved into the next number, You Gave Me a Mountain. The arrangement was rich, dramatic, with moments where the backing vocals added texture and soul. But again, Janet lagged. Just a breath behind, then rushed ahead. She was no longer blending. She was standing out, and not in the way she wanted. Elvis's face didn't change. He was a showman to the bone. But inside, his instincts kicked in. He knew something was about to give. Performances lived or died in the details, and tonight, the details were starting to unravel. Janet's body language had shifted too. She wasn't facing the audience like the others. She turned slightly inward, as if bracing for a fight or waiting to strike. Her shoulders were tight. Her eyes flicked back and forth like she was watching everyone but not truly seeing anything. Was it nerves? Stage fright? Or was there something deeper? The other backup singers tried to hold steady. A few exchanged glances. One whispered during the curtain break, "Is she okay?" No one had an answer. The strange energy began to ripple through the stage crew too. The audio techs adjusted her mic levels quietly, lowering her feed so the crowd wouldn't catch too much of her off-key delivery. The conductor subtly shifted the vocal cues. The band, seasoned pros, played on, but the tension was unmistakable now, at least behind the curtain. Still, the audience remained in the dark. To them, the king was delivering another dazzling night. But backstage, in the tight spaces between egos and nerves, something fragile was splintering, and it wouldn't stay hidden for long. The stage dimmed slightly. A hush swept over the room. The opening piano notes of a bridge over troubled water began to flow like a gentle river, echoing off the velvet curtains and polished walls of the Vegas Hilton showroom. This song was always a showstopper, one of Elvis's most emotional numbers. It required perfect timing, delicate harmonies, and a deep, soulful voice. And that night, the room was ready to be moved. Elvis stepped forward, his voice rich and resonant. When you're weary, feeling small, every syllable hung in the air like crystal. You could hear sniffles from the crowd. This was Elvis at his most vulnerable and most powerful. Behind him, the backing singers were poised to follow. A soft rise on the second verse, a chorus to swell behind his bridge. It had been rehearsed 100 times. But just as Elvis reached the vocal peak, like a bridge over troubled water, something went terribly wrong. Suddenly, Janet stepped forward, ahead of her mark, past the rest of the backup singers, and into Elvis's spotlight. And then, she sang, off script, uninvited, loud, off-key, and alone. It wasn't a harmony. It wasn't a backing note. It was a full solo line, one she wasn't supposed to sing. The sound cut through the hall like a jagged tear in silk. It was jarring, flat, and completely unexpected. The crowd fell into silence. A few people gasped. Others let out confused chuckles, thinking maybe it was some kind of creative twist. An inside joke? A planned moment? But no one on stage was laughing. The band froze. The conductor's baton hung mid-air. The backup singers looked stunned. Elvis stopped singing. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward Janet. And then, she smirked. Just for a second. Barely noticeable. But it was there. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't an accident. It was intentional. A line drawn in front of thousands. Janet had hijacked the moment, the most emotionally charged song of the evening, and claimed it as her own. Whether it was frustration, rebellion, or something deeper, it was public sabotage. No one moved. Ha ha ha. The stage, once alive with rhythm and harmony, had turned to stone. The only sound was the distant echo of Janet's last off note hanging in the air. Then, without warning, cut to black. A single beat of silence. And the narrator's voice drops, and in that split second, everyone held their breath. Elvis stood still for a moment, not angry, not confused, just still, as if time had paused mid-beat. You could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. The audience waited, expecting the obvious. A storm, a shout, maybe even a walk-off. That would have been understandable. But Elvis Presley didn't flinch. Instead, he turned back to the microphone. With composure only a few legends possess, he took a breath and calmly finished the verse. I will ease your mind. His voice, though quieter now, was clear and heavy with something more powerful than sound. Then slowly, he walked over to Janet. The band was holding their instruments like glass. One wrong note and it would all shatter. The backup singers looked down. Security near the side curtain moved slightly closer. Everyone was bracing for the fallout. And yet, Elvis did the unthinkable. He walked up to Janet, gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and smiled. Into the mic, he said with a steady, warm voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, that was a brave move. Let's give her a hand." There was a beat of stunned silence. Then, nervous clapping. Polite at first. Then slowly, gradually, the room joined in. The crowd didn't fully understand what had happened, but if Elvis clapped, they followed. Janet's face, once defiant, now shifted. Her eyes widened. Her smirk faded. She didn't expect grace. She didn't prepare for kindness. The insult, the act meant to embarrass, had been absorbed, transformed, and returned as applause. Not for her performance, but for his mercy. Elvis had flipped the moment on its head, without raising his voice, without a single word of blame. He didn't humiliate her. He didn't fire her on the spot. He didn't even call her out. Instead, he protected the dignity of the performance, and hers. Backstage, jaws dropped. The band looked at one another in disbelief. Some were upset. Some were amazed. But one thing was certain. He had just saved the show, and something more than that. He had saved a woman from falling apart under the weight of her own mistake. Because that's who Elvis was at his core. Not just the king of rock and roll, but a man who understood pain and chose compassion. The next morning, the whispers started. In the hotel lobby, in dressing rooms, in every corner of the Elvis crew, people wanted answers. What happened to Janet? Why did she hijack the stage like that? And why? Why didn't Elvis react with the fury everyone expected? Some assumed she was drunk. Others thought it was a cry for attention or an ego that cracked under the pressure. But the truth, as it often is, was deeper and far more human. Janet didn't come to rehearsal the next day. She didn't answer her phone. She didn't even return to her hotel room. It wasn't until later that afternoon, in a quiet corner of the Hilton lounge, that Joe Esposito found her sitting alone, staring out a window with untouched coffee in front of her. He sat down gently. No judgment, just silence. After a few minutes, she spoke. "I wasn't trying to ruin him. I snapped. Her voice cracked. She told him everything. Her story didn't start that night. It started years ago. Janet had been singing since she was a little girl. Church choirs, community theaters, smoky bars in Mississippi. Music wasn't just a passion. It was her lifeline. But life never gave her an easy path. Every opportunity seemed to slip through her fingers. She'd come close. Auditions, callbacks, temporary gigs. But the big break never came. When she finally landed a spot backing Elvis, it felt like salvation. But instead of joy, she felt pressure. A deep, sinking feeling that she was just another replaceable voice in the background. And then, 2 weeks before that Vegas show, her father died. He'd always believed she was meant for more. He used to say, "One day, you'll step out from behind someone else's shadow." Janet came to Vegas with her heart split open, grief in one hand, desperation in the other. That night, when Elvis began singing Bridge Over Troubled Water, her father's favorite song, something inside her broke. She didn't plan it. She didn't rehearse it. She just stepped forward. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a stunt. It was grief colliding with longing, and it came out wrong. When she finished her story, Joe didn't say much. He just nodded, stood up, and said, "I think the boss should hear this from you." Later that evening, Elvis invited Janet to dinner. No manager, no crew, just the two of them, in a quiet booth of the hotel's side restaurant. He listened, really listened. No notes. No judgment. Just that calm, steady presence he was known for. When she finished, Elvis leaned forward, looked her in the eye, and said, "You've got pain in your voice." But that pain? It's a gift. If you use it right, it won't destroy you. It'll move people. Janet didn't respond right away. But that was the first time in weeks she allowed herself to cry. The next night, the showroom was packed again. A new audience, a new set of expectations. But for those who had been there the night before, something in the air felt different. Backstage, Elvis prepared like usual, calm, composed. But this time, he stopped by the dressing rooms personally. When he reached the backup singers, he looked at Janet and said only 4 words. "Let's try it again." She nodded. No smirk, no attitude. Just gratitude. Just gratitude. That evening, when the curtain rose, Elvis stepped forward with his usual flair. The crowd roared. The band ignited. And the show returned to its familiar rhythm. But everyone on stage knew this was more than a concert. It was a test of grace, of second chances, and of whether someone broken could find their way back. Song after song, Janet stayed focused. Her harmonies were tight. Her timing was flawless. Her voice, while controlled, carried something new, something raw. The other singers noticed. So did the band. Proer, then came Bridge Over Troubled Water. As the piano intro began, a chill ran through her spine. Her hands trembled, but she held her ground. Elvis sang the first line, "When you're weary, feeling small." This time, when the moment came for backup vocals, Janet didn't step forward. She held her part, steady, strong, but humble. And this time the harmony was perfect. When the song ended, the audience gave a standing ovation. They didn't know what had happened the night before, but they could feel it. Something real had happened on that stage. After the show, backstage, the band gathered around. There were no grand speeches, just smiles, nods, and a few pats on the back. Elvis leaned over to Charlie Hodge and said, "Sometimes people don't need punishment. They just need someone to believe in them." Janet didn't say much that night. She just walked out into the quiet Las Vegas evening with tears in her eyes and a weight lifted from her chest. That one mistake, that one broken moment, could have ended her, but instead, it became her rebirth. She stayed with the group for the remainder of the tour. She got better, stronger, more confident, and eventually she moved on to lead choirs, record gospel albums, and mentor young singers, especially those who had been told they were too emotional, too fragile, too much. Whenever someone asked her where it all changed, she always said the same thing. "The night I embarrassed myself in front of Elvis Presley, and he chose kindness instead of cruelty." Years passed. The lights of Las Vegas changed, the music industry evolved, and new voices took the stage. But the story of that night, the night a backup singer nearly lost everything, and the king of rock and roll gave her something far more valuable than fame, never faded. Janet went on to live a quiet but meaningful life. She didn't chase the spotlight anymore. She didn't crave applause. What she did chase was truth, in music, in people, and in herself. She worked with young artists who struggled with stage fright, self-doubt, or pain too deep to explain. And whenever she shared her story, she didn't make herself the victim. She didn't pretend the moment on stage never happened. In fact, she made it the centerpiece. "We all crack sometimes," she'd say. "We all lose our way. The lucky ones, we get someone like Elvis, someone who lets us try again." There's a photo of her that still hangs in a small Memphis community center. She's smiling, mid-rehearsal with a choir of teenagers, her hand raised in tempo, her eyes locked on a nervous 16-year-old soprano. Below the photo, there's a quote, "A true greatness isn't how you hit the high notes, it's how you lift others when they miss theirs, Because kings aren't just crowned, they're revealed in how they treat people who can offer them nothing. Today, as the world rushes to judge, to cancel, to ridicule at the first misstep, this story stands as a quiet reminder that grace is louder than shame, that mercy can echo longer than anger, and that one act of kindness, especially when it's not deserved, can change a life forever. So next time you see someone falter, someone stumble or act out of pain, remember Elvis. And remember Janet, because the most unforgettable thing that happened on that Vegas stage that night wasn't the mistake, it was the forgiveness. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Was there ever a time someone gave you a second chance when you didn't deserve it?